All right, so thank you for joining us today. You are listening to Access Lunchtime, and today's topic is using SharePoint lists. Our guest speaker today is Andy. How do you spell or pronounce your last name? Tabitz?
It's Tabis.
Tabis. Sorry about that.
Yep, no problem.
And he is going to demonstrate for us how to move your Access data over to SharePoint lists, and then still use an Access front end to access those lists. So very happy to have you here with us today, Andy. And please tell us a little bit about yourself, either as you get started today, or as you're wrapping up things. And thank you very much.
Sure. Oh yeah, you bet. All right, quickly. So my company is WorkSmart Database Masters. We're based in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan, but we have 12 consultants across the U.S. We handle any size project from Access to .NET to SharePoint to SQL. We pretty much cover the gamut. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and let's see, we've got 4 MVPs that are also helping us out here. So that's about me. If you want to reach me, I'll put that, or actually, Lucy, if you can post my email address into the chat window, Andy at WorkSmartDB, like database.com, so it's really easy to find. What we're finding is that more and more people want to be able to share their data with people, whether it's either SharePoint or online or through mobile or things like that. So like in one case, there are people that may want to start using Power Apps, and I actually run a Power App user group as well. And so one of the great things about utilizing SharePoint is we can move the data from an Access database directly into SharePoint, and then after it's in SharePoint, we can either and what we're showing today is we're actually going to link it back up to Access. It's all automated, so I'll show you that. But once that data is in SharePoint, then you can use it with Power Apps or other Excel or other software as well. So that's kind of what we're getting into today. So what I did to start this, I'm going to show you my folder here, is I took, just for kicks, I took the Northwind database, and the Northwind copy I had was an MDB file, and so the first thing I did was I converted that to an ACC DB. The easiest way to do that for me was just to here, actually, I'll step you through it. So it's very simple. So if I'm in Access and I choose a blank desktop database, and I'll choose where we want to store it, we'll put it in Access lunchtime. I'll just call it database 4, that's fine. And then once you create that database, what we're going to do is just import all the records. So we're going to go ahead and choose external data, Access. We're going to browse back to lunchtime again, grab the Northwind database, choose open, and I'm going to import, in this case I'm going to import everything. So I'm going to go ahead and choose OK. I'm going to select all the tables, all the queries, all the forms, reports, macros, modules, do all that, choose OK, and it's going to just take all those and import them directly into an ACC DB format. So it's done. So it takes all of 30 seconds to do that. The reason why, and I know this topic isn't on MDBs, but the reason why I created an Access ACC DB or ACDB as it's called, instead of going into the MDB file and doing the upgrade, is that I've run into cases where some clients have features as part of an MDB, but that are not available in an ACDB. For instance, there are work groups. So the work groups don't work in ACDBs, and there used to be a replication manager that doesn't work that way. And so by creating an Access newer Access ACDB to begin with and importing those, then we avoid those kind of issues. And so that's just a quick way of doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this Northwind database that I had already converted, and you'll see here we've got all the tables, the queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. So this is the Northwind the database, but I made some changes. There are some issues with SharePoint where it doesn't like OLE objects, and it doesn't like occasionally it doesn't like hyperlinks. Sometimes I've had that work, sometimes not. But I also ran into something very strange when I did some testing beforehand. Is in the employees table there's a field called title, and I actually had to change that to something else like Title 1. I'm not quite sure why that is. If I left it as title and did the conversion, for some reason it thinks that the word title is there twice. I don't know if it's just because it's title here and title this way. I don't know. I'll have to look that up and try and figure out why that happened. But that's one change I had to make. So other than that, I don't need to do anything with this Access database at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I do within SharePoint. And Lucy, if people ask something in the chat window that you think I should respond to, just speak up and I will I'll address that right away, because I want people to be able to follow me on this. And so the next step is basically what we want to do is convert the data or the tables from the Access database over into a SharePoint list. And you can, if I were to do it directly to the site that I'm at, and I'm using worksmartmvp.sharepoint.com as my site. If I were to convert it to the main site, the main site will get overloaded with tons of lists and other stuff. And so typically what I do in circumstances like this is basically to create what's called a subsite. And a subsite, and you can see some of the lists here. A subsite is showing different areas of the main SharePoint site, but I can, like in this case, I had a presentation at the MVP conference in 2015, and so I created a subsite just for that. And so it's a good way to split it out. The other thing is that you can change the administrative functions and the password protections of those subsites, and so you can keep those separate so that only particular departments can actually see that. And so that's what we do. And so under site contents, what we do here is we're going to click on New and then choose Subsite. And so now it's going to ask us for what is the site name. So we're going to call this Access Lunchtime demo, if I can type. I'll go ahead and put in, whoops. Okay. And then I can choose what I want for the subsite, and I'll just call Access Lunchtime Demo. The other stuff down here, we really, for the purposes of what we're doing, I'm not going to fill in any of it because it takes time, but there's other things here where you can choose what kind of template you want to use. You can set up your permissions. I'm just going to use the same permissions as the parent, but you can use your own unique permissions if it happens to be an accounting site or some sub-site that you don't want other people to see. Do you want it to display quick launch? Do you want it on the top link bar? Different things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create this sub-site, and it takes a minute to do this. So basically what we're doing is we're just it's kind of like on your computer where you have a subfolder or a folder on your PC where you're keeping maybe all your client files, things like that, into the one spot. So while we're waiting on that, are there any questions in the chat window?
Not good, Andy.
Awesome. All right, good. And so our Access Lunchtime demo site is created, and you'll see right now it creates your typical buttons here, and you've got documents and site contents, all that kind of stuff. And so I clicked on site contents so you can kind of see the layout. If this looks different than your SharePoint site, they did change the way the look and feel of it, and so you can make the site look like the old SharePoint used to be. I kind of like the new look and feel, but it's totally up to people. But you can go into site settings and change it to the old look and feel. So currently in the contents area, you'll see we have documents, site assets, microfeed, and site pages. This is actually where the lists are going to end up going. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to grab Access again, and you'll see here we've got these different tables here. What we're going to do is we're going to click on Database Tools, and then we're going to click on SharePoint. And then within here, we can choose what the sub-site is. What SharePoint site do you want to use? So I'm going to toggle back, and the site I want to use is https worksmartmvp.sharepoint.com/access lunchtime demo, because that's what I called the sub-site. So I'm going to grab that link and post it here. Now, one question that before I forget that I've heard people talk about is that SharePoint lists can be, especially if you have large amounts of data, it can be quite a bit slower than a standard Access database. I know that Microsoft has been putting a lot of resources into speeding up SharePoint lists. And so just to kind of let you know that there's not a lot of data in this Northwind database, so I'm not too worried about it here, but I just wanted to point that out. And so we're going to go ahead and choose, we're going to choose that, then we're going to go ahead and choose Next, and then it's going to start converting. Okay, there it goes. And so now it's going ahead and it's creating the lists for each of the categories, customers, employees, order details. And so it's building all of that. So basically what it's doing is it's taking each of those tables, converting it over to a SharePoint list, trying to match the proper number and text and the field types that it can. And if there's any if you run into things where like it's an Olay object or it's a picture or things like that, it will error out on you. So it ends up creating a little table, and in fact I think even this one will do a little table, because there are functions even in this simple database that don't get that can't be transferred into SharePoint. Yeah, so this will take a minute. What's kind of cool is I can jump back into this Access Lunchtime demo, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. And so you can see as the tables are being built, We've got categories, customers, employees. Microfeed was already there, order details. So if we compare that, I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. You can see that the tables that are in Access are kept the same name here. Now, one thing it's still doing its thing, 59%, so it's still doing its thing. But in the meantime, let's say that something happened and you have an error in one of the tables or just stopped completely. If you end up having to redo this a second time, then what it's going to end up doing is, if you have these tables here, it'll create a categories underline 1 and a customers underline 1. And so it will build those. Now, if you want to avoid that, you can click on these 3 dots and choose remove. And you can also, and that will remove that table. Occasionally, it will even, sometimes because different tables might be related to other tables, you might run into issues doing that. So you can click on settings, and from here, you've got a lot of features within this. So you've got your list name and description, you've got versioning, so you can keep different updates, validation, so you can take certain fields and make them, that like, for instance, an email address might need to have the @ sign, things like that. You can also delete the list directly from here, and if this is connected, and I'm going to check to see how far, 90%, so it's getting there. So if you try and delete the list and there's a related table, then it will pop up and tell you what needs to be done. It may say, hey, the customers table is related to the orders table, or orders is related to order details, things like that. So we'll pop that up. You can also have permissions for this list. So most of the time, what I do is I give everyone access to the SubSite that I want to use that. But if you want to lock down the list itself, then you can click on permissions for this list as well. All right, let's see the other stuff. We don't. All right, so now it's gone through setting up the tables, and now it's going through and it's copying the data. So it's going through all of these tables again, and it's pulling that data into the tables that are within SharePoint. So we'll give that a minute. And so while it's doing that, I'm going to show you a little bit more about SharePoint since we're talking about that. We can click on Site Contents, and within here, if you can see how many people have used your site over the last few days, you can see what documents are trending. So let's say this is a business site, then basically you can see, okay, how many people within your department have logged in, or what documents within your department have people most seen. So SharePoint allows you to share documents, Excel files, lists, all kinds of stuff. So it's really a nice little package, and it does come with Office 365. So it's an easy way to jump into that. And actually, hold on a second. There's something else I can, if you want to get more into that. Hold on. All right, still, it's mapping the lookup columns. Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes, you're good, Andy.
Okay, good.
I can hear you too, Andy.
All right, good. So this is kind of the time consuming. This is probably this, you know, where you you start it going, and then you kind of walk away and get your coffee and stuff like that, because it takes a little while. And in the meantime, I wanted to show, let me find this real quick, because there is an event that's coming up that's a free, it's a free event for everybody, and it's coming up on, I think, March 16th. Hold on, let me just see if I can find it real quick here, just so I can share that with you. I'm looking, if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm looking at my other computer here. Yeah, it's called the SharePoint Virtual Summit. And let me pull that up for everyone, because this is a really cool event. Come on. All right, good. So let me move this over. This is done. You can see your tables have been successfully shared, so we'll get into that in a second. I just wanted, since we're a Microsoft community, and Maria and I and Juan, you know, we love to share different knowledge, and this is an event. If you Google SharePoint Virtual Summit, it's kind of a long, but here what I'll do is I'll drop this into the chat window here. Whoops. So there's a link, but it's a SharePoint Virtual Summit. It's free, and there just are a ton of different sessions that you can go talk about the future of SharePoint and things like that. So that's kind of a really cool event. Again, it's May 16th. I see someone, Maria, already posted that, so that's cool. All right, so this shows us our tables have been successfully shared. So we're going to go ahead and finish. And if there are any errors that pop up, what's going to happen is it creates this little temporary table. It'll say move to SharePoint site issues. We're going to go ahead and open that, and I'm going to widen these so you can see them. So in this case, it says field values will not be auto-generated. So it's talking about the table called customers, customer ID. And it says SharePoint only supports auto number field for their ID field. So in this case, if I look at the customers table, I'm going to go ahead and open it in design view. Yes, I know it's linked. This one table actually has two IDs. There's an ID at the top, which is an auto number field, and then there's a second one, which is customer ID, which is a short text field, which is basically the way you know, they are connecting customers to orders and things like that. They're using customer ID instead of this ID, and commonly we use the ID that's at the top. But so that's something to keep in mind, is that so field values will not be auto-generated if there's a secondary ID. Deletes will not be cascaded to related records. So generally when you're building relationships, you have the ability to update or delete related fields. So basically what that means is, let's say you have an order in your system and you went to Walmart and you bought Walmart popcorn. And so your order details, you've got your order, and then you've got what you ordered, you know, Coke, popcorn, whatever kind of things, and those kind of things are stored in your order details. So you've got your order record, and then you've got a bunch of things that you purchase, which are order details. If you were to delete that order, you can set up the relationship so that it'll automatically delete all the order items. If you don't do that, and you delete the order without deleting the order items, you have what's called orphaned records, because now you've got these items that aren't attached to any order, that's not good. And so what a cascading delete does is it deletes the records it deletes the order details records when you delete the order itself. So that's how that works. And then the next, SharePoint does not support unique indexes on any other column than the ID. And so that, again, there were indexing another field, so the unique index will not be enforced. And that's in the table called order details. And it tells you what the object is. So whether it's a table or whatever it is, what the object is, which is the table name, and then what field is involved in that. So, and I don't care about saving that. In fact, I don't really care about this. I can delete this table, and so that's fine. And so now you'll see here that we have several tables here, but instead of the standard table icon that you see, now they're changed to these ones that have a little arrow, a little blue arrow on it, and the table that's in SharePoint. So if I hover over this, it says it's the categories table, and it shows the subsite that we're using. So on all of these, it's basically saying, hey, the data is stored in that subsite. So let's take a look at that. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and open up the customers table. And so we can see here, we've got the customer IDs, customer name, city, region, all that kind of stuff. We're in record 1 of 91. We can see all that. And so I'm going to go, so we've got that customers table here in Access. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to jump back over to SharePoint. And so now, when we look at the site contents, like I said before, you've got all of these tables that are there that were built directly from Access. They were transferred over along with all the data. And so when we open up a list like this, it looks very similar to what we saw in the in Access. What it does though is it paginates it. So you got 1 through 30, and then 31 through 60, and then the last one, which is 61 through 90. So in order to keep SharePoint quick, instead of showing you all the records at once, it's showing you kind of a subset of those records, and it's faster if you can filter down that data quickly. So let's say I'll type in the word rat, and so it would. Some items might be hidden. So you can go ahead and you can filter data by what you're looking for. Okay, so that's what that is. I'm going to jump back over to Access, and we're gonna jump into a couple of these. The first thing I want to show you is that if I open up the customer's record, I can go down, and I'll just pick one of the top ones so we can see it. And so I'm going to take this top one, which is Maria, and I'm going to change that to B-A-R-N-E-S, Maria Barnes. And so we've updated that record in Access. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. And we're going to click on all items. And so you'll see here the contact name is Maria Barnes. And so as soon as you update the data in Access, you automatically update it here as well. So in here, I'm going to change this to Andy Tabis. And so now I typed in there, minimize, nothing up my sleeve. I'm going to refresh this data. And so now under contact name, you'll see Andy Tabus is here. So it doesn't matter whether you are in SharePoint editing the data or in Access editing the data. It doesn't really matter to you. So the really cool thing from my standpoint is now we've moved that data over to SharePoint. And if you have people out in the field that don't use Access, but you want them to access this data, now you could just give them, you know, a link to the SharePoint list, and they can edit it that way. Or you can take it a step further and quickly build a Power App. And a Power App is basically a business app that runs on a mobile device. And it works in browser window as well, but primarily, like, I use an iPhone, so you know, I can run a Power App on my phone, and I've just got, you know, a bunch of different Power Apps that serve different purposes. So, but I can build a Power App based on this information, and I can use it kind of like what you see here, or you can even build your own single view forms and things like that. So that's how that works. Now, the thing to keep in mind is, okay, so now we've moved over this customer's table, and it's just saying, do I want to save the layout? Because I expanded the contact name to be wider, it's saying, do I want to save that column being a wider look and feel? So I'll say no, I don't need that. So now let's say you're down the road, and I'm going to look at employees. And so I'm going to right mouse click on employees, and let's say we needed to make a change to the employee table itself. We want to make a design change. And so if we right mouse click on employees and choose design, you'll see that it pops up a little message. It says table employees is a linked table whose design can't be modified. If you want to add or remove, or if you want to add or remove fields or change their properties or data types, you must do that in the source database. So it says, do you want to open it anyway? I can say yes. But basically what it's saying is, okay, you know, here I've got last name and first name, but I don't see middle initial. If I want to add middle initial, I can't do it here because it won't allow me to do that. I'll even show you. I'll type in MI, short text, 255 is fine. I'll click on save. This table is read-only. Use a different name in the Save As dialog to save your changes. Now, I don't really like this message here because the table isn't read-only. You can edit the data. So the table design is read-only, even though the table data is read-write. So keep that in mind. When they're talking about the table's read-only, just means you can't change the design. And so I'm going to go ahead and, oh, you know what? I'll show you that again. If I click on this, it's kind of interesting. It says, use a different name in the Save As dialog box to save your changes. Well, if I were to do that, what it's going to do is create a local table, which doesn't help us. But you can, if you wanted to create a separate table that was local, you could certainly do that with the Save As, but I don't like that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And so since we can't change the list here, you know, basically what we need to do is go back to SharePoint. And then within SharePoint, we need to edit that list. And so I got to think about what's the best way of doing this. So in here, if we go into Edit View, we've got the view name, and it's allowing us to choose what fields are shown, what sort is shown, the primary and secondary sorts, the filter, and so you've got different things like that. You can also show more columns there. So that's the view of it. And then I'm going to go back to the site because I don't think I can change the list here. I think what I need to do is show the site contents, and I believe we click on settings. That's odd. So, Maria, do you remember how to add a field to a table in SharePoint? Or at least Lucy? I'm coming up blank here.
I think you can go back to where you're at and choose something besides settings there.
So maybe details?
No, do the settings, but then wasn't there other options under that? Yeah. Can you do something else from there besides the name description?
Yeah, let's, in fact, here it is. I'm sorry. It's right here. Create column.
Yep.
That's, we call that a BFO, a blinding flash of the obvious. Because, like, okay, I've done this dozens of times, but it's been a few months since I did it. So I'm going to go ahead and do middle initial. Do I want it a single line of text? But you can see there's a lot of different choices here. Here you can add your hyperlink and pictures. Additional column settings that you want. Do you want to require that this field has info? Do we want to enforce unique values, which we don't need to? Different people can have the same initials. And then we can add column validation here too. So if we wanted to make sure, hey, it has to have the @ symbol or things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and choose OK. And it's going to make that change to the table. Now I'm going to go back to site contents. And we're going to go back into, I think were we in customers or employees? You know what? I think we were in employees. And it's not showing. So I'm going to hit on okay, let's show me all items. I would need to modify this view in order to show it. Title. Oh, I thought I put it in here. I'm going to refresh this table here. Thought we did it employees. Look again. Version type title. Huh, that's weird. I thought it was this one. Let me go back to the other one. Sorry about that.
Andy, I also thought it was that employees table. So I don't know. Maybe you want to go back in and look at the. No, it's
yeah. You know what? It's right here. It's middle initials here. So
all right.
Yeah.
My bad.
I think I was going into design view of employees, and because I was looking at both customers and employees, I clicked on the wrong one. But you can see here, middle initial shows up there. And then if we go back to Access, and we go into customers there, we'll see here. Let's refresh that. Oh, that's bizarre. It's not even showing here.
Do you by any chance need to use a link table manager and refresh the table length?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go into link table manager. Actually, fastest way, I can just right mouse click on here. Oh, it's not even, why is it grayed out? No, it doesn't allow you to do it that way. Huh. Let me refresh it this way. So it did allow me to do it that way. So that's generally what happens is that when you right mouse click on one of these, you have access to the link table manager. And what the link table manager does is it shows you where all of your tables are connected to, whether it's SQL or SharePoint or another Access backend database. And then you can click on that to change it. In this case, since we're in SharePoint, it doesn't give us that option. So I clicked on more options and I went down to refresh list. And once I refreshed that list, it automatically showed us MI, the middle initial, being here. So, so basically, moral of the story is if you ever need to make a change in a table, you need to make sure that you go into SharePoint, make change to the list that's shown in SharePoint, and then it will carry over to your Access database. And then your Access database will work just like normal. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to open up the main switchboard. And again, we're looking at this. This is a very old Northwind database. So you'll see just very gaudy looking forms. But the thing just to kind of point out is that all of the information, all the data that's here it's connected to SharePoint lists. So I can modify the data here in a single view form, and then it carries over. So all of these, and you can see pictured wasn't there. So that would be something that we would need to relink. Click on products. We can see the products. But again, these are tied to these tables which are in SharePoint. All right. Any questions?
If you have a question, make sure that you either are unmuted to ask or else type it in the conversation. I do have one question, Andy. Is there any gotchas as far as the size of tables or the type of information or anything like that as far as avoid SharePoint lists if you have certain types of information or a certain quantity or anything like that you can provide?
Yeah, with SharePoint, again, the larger the database, the slower it's going to get. And when they moved over When they moved over SharePoint in SharePoint 2013, they were utilizing SQL Azure as the back end. So when you created an Access web app, it was using SQL Azure back end, which in SQL you can create as many the size of those as as big as you want. But when you're working with SharePoint lists, I'm trying to think how many. Because I know there are different workarounds. Because I know that the document size limit is like 2 gig, but I'm trying to think. I don't have a number of how big that you want that SharePoint to get. If anybody else has something on there.
I just found something that says 8,000 bytes per row, 2 gig per file, 30 million documents per library. That sounds like quite a few documents anyway, but the others are kind of limited. We also have a question on our conversation here from Scott. He says that he can't get his tables to move to SharePoint. He has text indexes like our customer number. He wants to know if he should create the index or lookup. I'm not sure if I understand that question, but maybe you do, Andy.
Can't get my tables moved to SharePoint.
I assume there's an error.
Yeah, is there?
Moving.
Yeah, Scott, is there an error message that you're getting when you do that? Because typically what will happen is that if it errors out, it'll pop up a little screen that said, it ran into an error, but it'll show you that little temporary table.
Lucy, if you could try to enable Scott's microphone, if at all possible. And I don't know if you can see the conversation, Andy. Scott says that there's a error mapping lookup columns. You cannot reference rows created when you are disconnected from the server because it violates the lookup setting defined for the table or list. Reconnect all tables with the server and try again.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd probably have to Google that and try and figure out why exactly that's happening.
If it were me, I would attempt to load the lookup tables first, and then the other tables that rely on them next in a couple passes, and see if that worked. Yeah, and Giorgio comments that the real crux of the matter here is that SharePoint lists are relational. So clearly they still do have relationships. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, you can link to different data sources through a, I believe you can. Let me. Yeah, I believe you can. Let me jump into it real quick.
Or maybe Giorgio is questioning whether or not they are relational or not.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Sorry for coming in a little bit late, but
so if they are not, then to me, the type of application that you would use SharePoint lists for would have its limits. You'd have to have one that was designed to not have, you know, enforced relations between tables, I would think.
Yeah, I would think so too. I haven't really gone into that part, so but let me see. According to this, I just did a quick search here, and it says navigate to the home page, click on the employees list, add each row of data to table 1 to the list.
Andy, can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't participate to the beginning of the meeting, so I don't. But why are you showing the lists in SharePoint? I believe that I might be wrong, but I believe that you're still using SharePoint as a backend to access. So,
you are, but that's what we talked about, is that let's say you have a salesperson on the road and he does not have an Access database, but he wants to be able to look at that data. By moving that data to SharePoint, you're allowing him to look at the data without having to install Access on his computer. Secondly,
right, but does the person on the road have an Access front end on whatever device he's using to check?
In our scenario, no, he doesn't have. Let's say he's got an iPad.
Yeah, but okay, but is still a back-end front-end scenario here, or is it just everything on SharePoint? Because then, where does Access come in? If
it's both. It's both, because what we're doing is we're not getting rid of the Access functionality. Let's say as the IT manager, you can keep using Access all day long if this is the way you like to manage it. But if you have somebody on the road, maybe you don't want them to have the whole Access database, or they just want to look up something on their mobile device.
Right. But for data input, the person on the road uses an Access form?
No, they don't have to.
Oh, right. So how do you input?
Yeah, so they would either use they can jump directly into the SharePoint list. If they want to do that, you can add different views of that data, so you can kind of filter that data for them that way, or
yeah, but the views you create them directly within SharePoint.
Correct. Yeah, so they would have to be able to get to SharePoint that way.
Where does Access come in this equation here? Because if you input the data using SharePoint views, and you still view the data in SharePoint, so where does Access factor into this scenario?
In this scenario, let's say you have a company and you've got 10 people using this Access database. And so you don't want them to lose all the functionality of using Access.
So you migrate this data to SharePoint, right?
Correct. Like so instead of having an Access front end and an Access back end, for instance, we move the Access data to SharePoint. We don't want to limit what the users of Access are able to see. We still want to have the same single view forms and list view, the data sheet views and things like that. But
okay, you're talking about desktop users now.
We're talking about both. Again, what I'm saying is what I'm saying is, let's say up until this point, only people within your organizations have been able to use your Access desktop. because it's on their local computer.
Right. So you want to add to this capability also the possibility for someone on the road to check out the database. So you migrate the Access backend to SharePoint, and the people, if I understand correctly, the people using desktop PCs, they will still be looking at Access forms, though the Access forms actually are drawing their data from SharePoint lists rather than from an Access backend. And the people in the street will just look at SharePoint views, no Access front end involved in this case, if I'm understanding correctly. So basically, all the actual data does not exist in Access anymore, has been migrated to SharePoint, but you retain the Access forms for people using desktop PCs, or basically, when you're in the office. And on top of that, you also have people on the road. They use their own devices, and they don't use Access front ends in this case, but they still draw on the basically on the backend data, which is on SharePoint lists. So basically, it's just you just have all the data. If I understood correctly, all the data is being migrated to SharePoint lists. It's just that in the case of desktop, you just use Access forms to display the data. And
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and in the case of people on the road, you just use like SharePoint views, something like that, in order to allow them to see the same type of data.
Right, or you can even create a Power App, to connect to that data on their phone. But now you're putting the data somewhere where people outside of your Access world can use that data as well.
Yeah, but I think that still the question still remains, because if you start from the beginning, you have a purely desktop solution which has an Access front end and an Access back end. Then you move the back end to SharePoint lists. But then, don't you think that problems might ensue? Because at the end of the day, if the SharePoint lists are not actually relational, then they cannot perform in the same way as if you were actually linking or drawing your data from an Access backend as opposed to a SharePoint lists backend, because the Access backend is inherently relational, while SharePoint lists probably are not. So I think that maybe the performance is not the same. If you think of just
right, yeah, and we've talked about that earlier before you got here. Is that you're not going to have the same, especially right now. This is SharePoint Online, so it's having to pull that data down from the cloud instead of running it on your local desktop. So it's definitely going to be slower. And as I said earlier, I know that Microsoft is, because Chris McNulty had a blog post about it just over the last 2 or 3 months, where he said that they're working on making SharePoint much quicker, because they realize that that's a concern.
But does that involve also relationally enabling SharePoint?
I would imagine that if you can't do it currently today, I would imagine that would be a big next step. Because I would think that would be the next step.
But why not using Azure as opposed to SharePoint? Because I think that Azure is relational, isn't it?
Well, that may be a session in the in the future, Giorgio. But they asked me to present on using Access with SharePoint lists, so I can't present on other topics.
Right. So I guess if there are users who are interested in seeing whether it is possible to have a proficient connection between the Access front end and SharePoint lists, I suppose that today you've given such a demonstration.
Right, exactly. And that's what this one was about. And there's an entire group that's devoted to Access with SQL. And so if people want to go to that route, that's awesome. That's great. And I strongly encourage people to do that. What we were just doing today was just, hey, if people want to move their data to SharePoint lists, how do you go about doing that?
But actually, SQL is not on the cloud, right? Or not necessarily.
Azure Azure means that it's the cloud.
But Azure is Azure the same as SQL?
SQL, it's called SQL and SQL Azure. SQL is done locally on your local servers.
Okay.
Azure is SQL in the cloud. So great.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for the topic today. The presentation was wonderful. We do need to try to wrap it up here because we typically limit our sessions to an hour. So if there's anything else you need to add or would like to add, feel free to do so. And in the meantime, I put on our conversation a link to next month's topic for lunchtime, and that will be differences between the most recent Office versions, 2010, 2013, 2016. There's not a lot of differences, but there are some, and we will discuss them. So,
cool. Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.